Your real problems aren't your circumstances, but your reactions to them. Tell me about that quote and kind of where you realized that, or who told you that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like many people, I was on a quest to architect the perfect life, have a successful startup, have a perfect body, like have amazing friends, have a hot girlfriend, like have all the things, right? Have money. And when you're on that orientation, you're always one imperfection away, right? Like when I just have my company to an exit, or when I just finally meet the woman of my dreams, right? And so you think that all of those are your problems. And that's mostly how I operated my entire life until I eventually met a spiritual teacher named Carol, who's a wonderful woman in her 70s that you would never be able to find online. And very early in our relationship, she was asking me what I wanted for my life. And I told her the two main things that I thought were my problems at that point, which is one, my company, I wanted it to be more successful than it was. And B, I wanted to find the woman of my dreams. And she's like, oh, that's cute. Like, you think your problems are in the outside world. And long story short, she confirmed to me, she's like, actually, your problems are just how you feel about everything, how you're relating to everything. And that was a very pivotal aha for me that was really reinforced by this practice that she instructed me to do at the onset of our relationship, which is just start paying attention to every single time you become disturbed. And so every single time you're annoyed, every single time you feel like you're in a rush, every single time you're stressed, every single time you're taken out of a calm, peaceful state. And so I started to do this, and I had a little Apple Note on my phone where I started to write these things down just to kind of track them. And it was like, holy shit, like my entire life is a disturbance. I can't go get a coffee at the local coffee shop without being annoyed at how slow the line's moving, or that the price isn't what I want it to be, or whatever. And that exercise, just seeing so clearly all these examples of just me reacting to stuff in absurd ways, what really reinforced this idea that, wait a second, it's actually, maybe it's a me problem. It's not an outside world problem.
What is the saying, as within, so without? And like, I think once you realize that, I think it almost becomes obvious. Like, of course that's the way things are, but yet most people, I don't feel like they understand that. They didn't have a Carol in their life to open their eyes to that.
Well, we don't have, it's what our culture feeds us, right? Like our culture tells us that we're just one epic Instagram reel milestone away from having a sick life and feeling really good about ourselves. And it often takes a lot of people a lot of time pursuing their life that way and getting those things to ultimately realize that what they're actually chasing is just a certain way of feeling and way of being. And there's a more direct path to working towards that, which is working on yourself from the inside out.
Which is kind of hard, because once you start to look internal, you begin to see all of the things that need the work, and maybe you didn't even know it was there. So like I don't know if people are afraid to do it and that keeps them from it, like subconsciously they know there's stuff in there they don't want to deal with, or they just haven't had the moment to realize, oh, the outside world is a reflection of what's going on inside, and to fix the outside, I've got to go inside. And hopefully, conversations like this can help people realize that sooner, because I feel like, I don't know about you, but it sounded like you had to get to a moment to where you could finally understand and grasp it, and then actually integrate it into your life. And you probably had moments or people throughout your life that kind of gave you some of this information, but you weren't ready for it. So I just look at this as like, you and I are planting a seed today to hopefully have somebody have their Carol moment sooner than they would have if they didn't tune in.
I love it, man. That's why I love talking about this stuff is, you go on this journey and it becomes the most enriching, meaningful one of your life, starting to understand more about yourself and reality and these certain kind of laws that seem to be in effect, like as within, so without. And you just want to share it with people, right? Because it's had such a big, meaningful impact on you. So I'm honored that we get a chance to do that.
It's funny you say that about sharing it with people. There's two quotes I've been kind of thinking about a lot lately, and they're not directly connected, but one of them is, and I'll butcher it, but basically it's, those who don't know talk, those who know don't talk. And so like I think about like, okay, if I know these things, should I be talking about them, or should I just maybe live and show it? But I feel like if we know these things, some of us have to talk about it just to get people to be aware of it. And then one of my favorite books is The Alchemist. And I actually was listening to it this weekend as I took my middle child up to Detroit for soccer. And there's a part where the alchemist and Santiago get approached by these warriors or these army guys. And the alchemist straight out tells them this is the elixir of life, and this is all these powerful things he's telling them, and then they laugh at him and leave. And Santiago's like, well, why would you tell them the truth? And he said sometimes when you have this information, you have this truth, people will laugh at you. So I think about these things a lot, and having conversations like this, is there a better way for us to be helping people and not talking about it? Should we not be talking about it, or should we? And sometimes I send myself in circles as I think about that. At the end of the day, ultimately, obviously, I come to, no, I feel like I should talk about it because here we are today.
Well, I think so. Let's ground this in like the outside reflects the inside. And so for me, a big part of my journey is realizing that this difference between context and content with any action. So content is like just the service level reality of whatever we're doing. Like we're talking right now about this topic on a podcast. The context is more the underlying motivations or circumstances surrounding that action being taken. And so I remember, I was quite confused about a lot of things that I used to do that I thought were like egoic, right? And so sharing on social media, like all this shit, like how many people do that from a place of needing to feel important or wanting to be special or wanting to be acknowledged, right? And so if that's your context, like you're just reinforcing that pattern. And that's actually not really getting to the root of your own personal evolution and moving towards this more natural state of unconditional love and joy. But if you start to work on that and realize those things, like, that would be an example of a reaction. And I had I had one of these come up today where, I'm trying to get on podcasts, talk about my new book. And somebody's like, oh, you should have so-and-so like lob in a request to that podcast host to talk about your book. And I noticed there was like this like trepidation, right? There was this pause, right? And so to me, there's like something to investigate there because I saw myself in the about to take that action and just like, there was a hesitation, there was a conflict, there was something, right? And so I think with like, just getting back to the sharing thing, really getting to the root of like, why do you need to share? And is it because you just feel so passionate and inspired to do it that you can't not do it? Like that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I was like, I just have to write this. Like I can't not write it. Or is it because you love how it feels when people tell you how smart you are, or you love getting the replies and the retweets or whatever? And, it's just a real moment of intellectual honesty and really turning inwards often when we start to notice how we're relating to these activities that can help us get to the root of like, should I share or should I not? And my answer to that question is to more focus on the context around it and understanding that about yourself. And then before you know it, if you do enough cleanup work, like I don't give a shit about, just letting things rip when I feel a sense of inspiration. But I certainly wasn't always like that and had to look at a lot of things first.
I always try to check things of like, where is this coming from? Is this coming from a state of love? Like I've read a lot about consciousness over the last few years, and love is usually the highest or on the higher end of the spectrum, even though it's not the vertical spectrum. But just to give people a visual. So is it coming from a place of love? And that, as you were describing, like, why am I sharing this? It made me think about, for the longest time, my oldest is 15. I've taken the boys to a coffee shop on most Fridays. And I always loved to just take a picture and post it. And I don't know why I wanted to post it. Like, I don't have big following, so it wasn't about the views. I just felt like I wanted to share this. And over time, I would get DMs from other dads that were like, that's so cool. I started doing that with my kids. And so it was really cool that I shared this thing because I don't know why I felt like I needed to. And it had this, effect on other parents. And so like, as the boys got older, they're like, oh, I don't want my picture taken. I was like, guys, you don't understand how many kids now get to have these cool experiences with their dad just because we shared a picture of us going to coffee. And I just go back to, it wasn't about the views. It wasn't about the likes. I had this overwhelming feeling to share just because I wanted to. And the impact of it was really cool. So to me, that was coming from a space of love. I love my boys, obviously, but I was showing this cool experience, and it ended up having a good impact.
Well, what strikes me about that example is that there's an intelligence behind that impulse, right? Mm-hmm. There's an intelligence there's a benevolent intelligence within you that, in my opinion, is guiding you to your highest potential and contribution. And it does so in many ways, and one of those is inspiration. And so, you didn't know that you were going to have some impact by doing that, but you just felt this, you just like, I just got to do this, right? And look what happened. And I think in today's society, we're so in our heads, we so easily dismiss that, and we're also not taught about these various forms of intelligence that are not just of the intellect. And we miss out on stuff like that, right? We miss out on this guidance that can see around corners and is leading us to a greater contribution and potential.
I want to stay on this topic of intelligence, and I promise we'll dive into the book. I want to go back to today's experience with the podcast and getting the lob into the other one. Have you had enough time to kind of dissect that internal intelligence about what that reservation was? Because I had a feeling, as you shared that, I had a feeling as if I was in your shoes of like what my reservation would be. I'm just curious if you have an idea of what it was.
Yeah, I did. I did actually go into it right before this. It's one of the beautiful things about this whole concept of working with your response to life is that you're just constantly getting feedback from reality around where your next mirror polish is, right? Like where your next opportunity to expand is. And so I went into that scenario, and the phrase that kind of surfaced in my consciousness was, you haven't done enough yet. And one of the things that I like to try to do is to try to go back and to understand, where was that root imprint? What was the first time that this concept that I hadn't done enough yet was embedded into my consciousness and started to kind of color the entire way that I perceived and related to reality? And what came up for me was this feeling of liking this girl and her not liking me back. And I had a construct around the reason that she didn't like me was because I hadn't done enough. Like I wasn't athlete, schools, friends, like I needed to cultivate a better life. And that is a whole construct too, right? That the reason that people would like somebody else is because of what they have done. And so, that was what was there for me. And I needed to kind of face that and feel my way through it, and ultimately come back to just like loving myself and telling, and in that experience, there was a knowing that like, I already am everything that I'll ever be. And I didn't create those words. Like that emergence of information that was witnessed was coming from a deeper intelligence inside of me.
I appreciate you sharing that. But I think that's a great illustration of, things from our past still living with us today and impacting the decisions we make, how we feel about ourselves. Like that's the thing as a parent that really scares me is I love my boys more than anything in this world. but I know there are things I'm doing today out of love that are going to be in their brains when they're older and they have an opportunity to go on a podcast, and something that me and my wife may have done out of love is, messing with their head. That's the scary part about being a parent.
It is, man. But at the same time, like, you just got to accept that you're going to F up your kids a little bit.
Yeah.
And you do the best that you can. Right. And I look at, my deepest wounds are from my parents, straight up. And I love them. And they did the best that they can. And they did so much better than their parents. Right. Like, I look at how my mom was treated, and then like how I was treated as a reaction to how she was treated. And then like how I'm treating my daughter as a reaction to those two things. And, we're fortunate enough to have these tools to try to minimize the damage, if you will. But I think part of our own journey to unconditional loving ourselves is just accepting that, hey, like, we're going to F up, and we're going to do the best we can. And that's okay.
Well, let's dive deeper into the book. So, Conscious Accomplishment, you mentioned you just had this overwhelming feeling to write it. My question was going to be, why did you write it? You told us that, but could you tell us more about this feeling and what is it that you were hoping the book is going to do for people?
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, it's kind of one of those things where I never really intended to write a book. Like, I was always like, that'd be a cool idea. Maybe at some point I'll have something to say. And then I had this really wonderful lunch with a buddy of mine, and I just started sharing some really vulnerable stuff. Like it was just after he had his first plant medicine experience. So he was kind of like opening up to this consciousness stuff. And I was just sharing some things that happened to me in my life and how that impacted my journey. And, he came out of that conversation saying, dude, this is like one of the most meaningful conversations I've had in my life. I've told you things I haven't told my wife, who I've been with over 10 years. And I came back to my house and I was taking a shower, and it just came into my awareness that my stories and experiences could create permission for others to grow and evolve and to be seen and to know they're not alone. And so the next day I just got up and I started writing. I didn't really have really an understanding of what the book was or where it was going to become, what it would become. But I knew that, I was being guided to write it. And so I just did that. And eventually there started to be some of these major themes that coagulated. And I think it started to really become clear that many people like myself, who had been very traditionally ambitious, had like followed the default script, right, of trying to be successful and all these things, didn't really understand how they could pursue spiritual growth or consciousness and still have like their life look the way that it did, right? This was a real big thing for me, where it was like, okay, I'm an all-in person. Like, I've been running a startup. I'm in New York. I'm dating. I'm doing all these things. Like, once I kind of like clicked, like, I've been playing the wrong game. Like, the consciousness stuff is like the most fundamental thing that way you could work on your life. Like, I need to go play that game. And there just wasn't a lot of examples to me or playbooks or guides of like, well, here's how you do that while you still run a company. Or here's how you do that while you're still, a guy in his late 20s, early 30s, dating around New York City, like living in the West Village, like all this stuff that I was doing. And so, yeah, I think like there's this idea that I love in Eastern traditions of a householder. And a householder is somebody who, has a house, has a family, has a job, has all these responsibilities, but they're still an earnest spiritual aspirant. And what we mostly have inherited is that this idea that if you want to take your evolution seriously, you should become a renunciate. You should kind of give it all up, go join an ashram, go become a monk or something. And that's really just not needed. Like, you don't have to do that. If you feel called to do it, great, go do that. But like, that's certainly not required. And so, it started to become really clear that like showing a very concrete, middle way to use everyday life as a vessel for consciousness evolution was what wanted to come out of me. And that by articulating a lot of these concepts as a younger dude who was living a traditional life and in some ways living a life that many people aspired to in terms of being an entrepreneur and yada, yada, that would actually have a meaningful way of grounding these concepts in a relatable way to people. Because that was another thing that I remember feeling as I got on my spiritual path was just like, okay, everything I'm reading is just like from old white or Indian dudes. And none of them have the responsibilities that I have. None of them are look and act the same way that I am. None of them like watching football on Sundays. Like none of them are really are like me. And, you know, I connected with the material, but I didn't connect with who that person was. And so part of what I hope to do is to show people that, you know, you can enjoy and all the parts of your life that of modern life that you still like, right? But you can also really, really go for it on your consciousness journey and grow rapidly while you enjoy those things.
I like that because I think that aligns with my belief of like finding and living your authentic life. And, you know, as a financial advisor, money touches everything. And so I'm working on some writing. And one of the things I want to write about is how, you know, having nice things doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. Like there's this little bit of stigma that if you buy the expensive car, you buy expensive jewelry, like you're being wasteful with money. And it's because a lot of times people do that for what we talked about earlier with like the social media. It's for the attention, it's to impress people. But like sometimes people have things that they really value that are aligned with who they are and what they want to be doing in life. And in that circumstance, I don't think there's anything wrong with driving an expensive car. If you buy the expensive car for you, if it's for others, then okay, maybe that's not what you should be doing. But if it's for you, then I think go do that. And that goes against a lot of what we're being told. So I love the fact that you wrote this so you could let other people who are like you see themselves in this writing. Why did you come to the title Conscious Accomplishment?
Well, the title just kind of emerged, honestly.
I figured that was going to be the case.
Like I had originally, it was like section 3, the book split into 3 parts. And originally it was the name of the 3rd part. And my editor was like, whoa, I really like this. And I was like, yeah, I do too. I was like, wait, I actually think this should be the original title for the book was The Imprinted Entrepreneur, which has a funny name, but it basically, the idea was like, I'm just like a big bag of imprints from the outer world. And we all are until we start to examine them. And so anyways, eventually it was just like, yeah, wait, this actually is the title. And I think what I like about that title is that it directly in the subtitle, just so I think I can make this point, is how to use personal achievement for spiritual growth. And I think part of what I'm trying to articulate with this book is similar to the example that you just shared where, you know, oh, buying nice things is bad, right? Like buying nice things, you're greedy, you're wasteful, you're showy, like there's all these concepts, right? Well, one of the main concepts in our culture is that if you're spiritual, you're poor, or you're just letting go, or you're just not getting any shit done, or you're ineffective, right? There's all these ideas that we've inherited. And that to me is just not true. And there is a way to actually use whatever you feel called to accomplish in your life as a way, as the primary way to see yourself clearly and to evolve. And I think it really just meets people that have been ambitious in their lives with that kind of both end title, right? Both end, like, yeah, I do want to grow spiritually and I do want to accomplish things and I do want to have a nice house or whatever it is you want. And the good news is you don't have to choose, right? The idea that we have to is just an idea. One
of the stories in the book, I think this is probably a story you're going to talk about a lot as you do these conversations, but the story about the barista and the laugh, you know, what was it about that? What is it about that story that stands out so much for you and kind of how it plays into how it shapes your views of accomplishment?
So the story was basically me realizing that I was unhappy, right? And I was, you know, my life on paper looked great. Like I was living in New York City. I was a Forbes 30 under 30. My company had raised millions of dollars from top VCs. I was in great shape, like vibrant social life, healthy, all the things. And, you know, I'm sitting in this coffee shop and waiting in line, and this woman is just laughing like so freely. Right. And here I was like a ball of like so tight, like, why isn't my coffee ready yet? Like, I got to get to work on time. Like, I got to be the first one in the office. Like all these, like, just like racing, anxiousness, urgency, and just kind of hit me like, where the hell, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, maybe I have it all wrong. Like, maybe like this idea that I had that I've been pursuing for so long of just like trying to just achieve my way to happiness is actually not the right idea, right? Because here's this person who, you know, she didn't go to an Ivy League school. She wasn't like a big time athlete. She wouldn't have some big job, and she's happy as shit. And I'm over here like about to explode, right? And I did all the things. And so, yeah, it was a real humbling moment of recognizing that maybe this whole game I've been playing is actually backwards or not the right one. And I think how I think about it today is like, it's this move away from thinking about success and thinking about the goal as some list of things, right? And more about your moment to moment state of being. And so like that joy, like that, just like freedom to just like laugh your ass off, even if you have a deadbeat job, and that's no offense to baristas, but like, I'm just saying it is an example of like a job that you don't like, whatever, or isn't prestigious. Like that's the prize. Like that's that way of being is what's up. And there's a way that you can work on your life to go directly for that. And you don't have to give the other stuff up. You can have both.
I want to hit on some of the important topics that you discussed that kind of goes into this. But before we do, we've talked about consciousness a little bit. And there might be some people listening, watching that are kind of just now getting into this world. So how, like, when you talk about consciousness, like, what does that mean to somebody new to the subject matter? How would you introduce them to this idea of consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a multifaceted word, but I think there's components. So for me, the one is like the subjective experience, like whatever you're experiencing right now, both in the outer world and the inner world, you are conscious of, you are aware of. And so awareness is a component of consciousness. Another component of consciousness is really what enters our awareness, right? And so for me, like all the thoughts, all the emotions, all the things that automatically bubble up, the way we relate to things, like that is all a fundamental part of our consciousness. And the way that I really describe that in the book is we have this thing called a reference system, which essentially everything we've ever experienced is informing how we're relating to our current experience. And so that's a part of our consciousness. And so, yeah, I think, and the last thing I would say is our perspective of who we are. And so we have this awareness, we have this shit coming up that's bubbling up in there, and we're observing it. And then, well, what does that make us, right? And so those three things are how I think, broadly speaking, about consciousness. And I think there's other things like, you know, well, consciousness is all there is, right? It's the fundamental substrate of reality. Like there's all of that too, which I think there is definitely there's definitely truth there. But I think from a practical perspective, for people that are just getting into this stuff, like I wouldn't worry about that as much. And I would just worry about like, well, who are you and why are you seeing the world the way that you're seeing it?
It's perfect. And that actually is a good kind of setup to one of the ideas you introduced, is the outside in paradigm. And we talked about this a little bit, you know, as within, so without. But what I want to kind of dive into deeper is, how can somebody recognize if they're in that paradigm, or or
Yeah.
should be, I guess.
Yeah. So the outside in paradigm is this idea that your problems and the solutions exist outside yourself in your life. And so you approach them by trying to control and rejigger things and make everything around you perfect, right? And you can do that for a lifetime, right? And that's fine. But I think how you know that you're in it is if, to me, you find yourself like that whole exercise I described, where like you being really disturbed by anything that's happening around you is implicitly indicative that you think that something should be different than it is on the outside for you to feel good. Because if you didn't, then you would just feel good, right? And so I really think just like that exercise of just like noticing when like things don't go my way, how I react is a clear telltale sign of being in the outside in paradigm and having parts of our aspects of our consciousness, right? Mostly that are probably outside of our conscious awareness and the subconscious that are influencing that, right? So like you could tell yourself a story, and this happens to me still all the time, right? And I've been on this journey for 7-8 years now, going hard at it. Like you can tell yourself a story that like, oh, I don't care about money. Like I'm good, right? And then you go to a restaurant and the bill's like a little bit more than what you expected, right? And you notice yourself just like, oh, like, like I'm annoyed, right? Or why is it so expensive, right? And so like those moments, right, are reflections of like the broader aspect of your consciousness that includes the subconscious, right? Of like how you actually feel and how and what's there, right? And you use that as a cue to kind of go investigate. So yeah, those are just a few examples. I mean, I would also just say like ask yourself like what do you think the main problems in your life are, and if it's something outside of you, then yeah, you're in the outside in paradigm.
So it sounds like obviously recognizing that you're there is the first step. How do we begin to flip it? How do we, okay, I realize that I'm on the outside in. How do I change my thinking, my perspective? Like, how do I stop living there? Like, it's one thing to not to know it, but how do I change that?
Yeah, well, I think I would just acknowledge there's a ton of ways that you can start to flip the switch, right? And just broadly speaking, like the idea is to go from looking outward and that being the source of your efforts and problems to like starting to integrate looking inward, right? When something isn't going your way or you're upset or you're happy. And there's a ton of different modalities and teachers and practices and different things you can do. What I shared in the book and what I still do and what has worked for me is, you know, using those triggering experiences and then taking them into a practice. And the high level idea of the practice is identify the moment when you were triggered, right? Open and face it, like by basically kind of dropping into your body and seeing what comes up and just like allowing it to be there, accepting that it's there, welcoming. It's like, you know, you welcome the thoughts, you welcome the emotions, you welcome the sensations in your body. And then eventually you get to a place where you can actually apply conscious agency to replace that. And in the beginning, this happens very kind of just like using your mind, but eventually you start to get to a point where that replacement and alchemy and transformation starts to happen automatically or through a deeper intelligence, which I call the true self. And so, you know, it's a daily practice of just like taking whatever life gives you that's just taking you out of peace, that's frustrating you, that's making you upset or nervous or angry or whatever, and turning the mirror inward and seeing what's there below the surface, and then coming back to like meeting that and ultimately shifting it to a state that's more aligned with your essence, which to me is these open heart qualities of love and trust and openness and gratitude and you know, things we would traditionally associate with how we want to show up in the world.
Tell me more about the true self. You mentioned that. What do you mean by the true self?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different words for true self. For me, at the core, it's our eternal essence. It's the unchanging part of our being that is eternal. It's always going to be there. It's infinite. It's been with us for every single experience and across all lifetimes, and will be there moving forward. And that is directly connected to the divine source of all creation. It's essentially a kind of a fragment of it, experiencing itself through us. And so, other words for this are soul, capital S, higher self, right? Like there's all these words for this idea of like that eternal essence that we are. And when you go on the consciousness journey, you can start to make contact with it more regularly, but there's a gradual process where that eternal essence starts to become a more prominent and even permanent fixture of basically your processing of reality. Like it's just there, and it's not like you need to go do some magical practice to go connect with it. And so I think part of the idea with a lot of consciousness work and spiritual practice is shifting who the contributors are to who's experiencing, right? So, all these like patterns and imprints and programming, and people like parts as a word, like that's the predominant experience before you get on a conscious path. And then as you start to kind of clear a lot of that debris out, there's just more space for that true self essence to just be there. And it's, intuition is an example of like a word that you might hear a lot. And the way that I interpret that is like, it's really, at least one major form of intuition is really just your true self, right? It's really just information from that eternal part of your being made available in a way that it wasn't before. That's guiding you. That's constantly there helping you.
Intuition was one of the ones I want to hit on later, but I want to stay here now since you brought it up. Because I write about it and talk about like listening to your intuition and letting it be your guide. Like I kind of believe that intuition is intuition is the divine communicating to you to kind of guide you. Like if we're trying to be the version of ourself that we were created to be, intuition is that guide. Does that fall in line with kind of how you think about it? Again, I think intuition's a word that maybe isn't as broad as true self and all of those, but it's still used in different ways. Like, tell me more about intuition, how it plays in what your belief is, and kind of following and listening to it.
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that was really helpful for me is discovering the HeartMath Institute's model of intuition. So you'll have like different people say different things about it. Like Western science is like, oh yeah, well this is just like, you're pattern matching, right? That's intuition. And then you have people that are like, oh, I have this feeling in my gut, like when I was around someone, and that's my intuition, right? And then you have things like that you just shared where you're like receiving information that's guiding you, right? That's probably, maybe incorporates a bodily sensation, but maybe doesn't. And so like, how do you make sense of all that? Like, what is intuition actually, right? And I think what the HeartMath Institute did is basically define that, hey, there's different types. So there's implicit learning, which is like what I think the Western model often acknowledges, where you just have a lot of repeated experience and you start to just kind of like be able to pattern match rapidly. So think of a doctor who's seen thousands of patients, and someone comes in and starts to name a symptoms, like, oh, you have this, right? And so like, maybe that's divine guidance, but probably for most people, unless they're doing this work, that they're just kind of pattern matching with their exposure events. And then you have the energetic sensitivity, where our bodies and nervous systems can pick up on electromagnetic fields. It's often why you walk in somewhere and you get a bad vibe, or you listen to a song and you get like an uplifting thing, right? There's an intelligence there that as we purify ourselves, we start to have more interoception, which is a capacity to feel what's happening in our body. And, that's a form of intelligence too. And then what HeartMath calls non-local intuition, which I would call divine intuition, is when we can start to pick up on information outside of our experience, right? That we shouldn't be able to know. So like you being guided to do something that you might make no sense, right? But there's just this inner knowing that it's true or that you should do it. That to me is an example of the divine intuition. I would also say things like inspiration would be an example of that, which might not be like a particular phrase or words or feeling, but it could just be like, I just really know I got to do this, right? Or I should do this. And so, yeah, that to me is that divine intuition. I'd also say I do believe in, things like that. I didn't cover this in the book, but I do believe in our ability to receive information from other beings, and guides would be an example, right? And so that's kind of non-local to us, but that's a little bit different than the true self or the inner guide. And part of the journey is learning how to discern all these different things and understand like what you can trust and when you should maybe do something a little bit more conventional, right? Like use reason. So yeah, there's a lot there, but I'm excited for more people to know about this stuff because I think our culture is still really kind of just waking up to it.
Well, I mean, I'm an example of that. I gave you one version of intuition. I didn't even know about the heart math. So I wrote that down. I'll try to find that and put it in the show notes so people can look into that as well. I couldn't help, though, when you talked about the intuition, that being from other beings, thinking about Interstellar and like that movie and the guidance they get from the other beings that they don't know who they are. So that made me think of that. Let's go. I want to stay kind of close to intuition, and I talk about this a lot as well. It's kind of like listening to your heart. You talk about talking to your heart, and how that can help us access greater intelligence. How do we talk to our heart, and what does that even mean?
Yeah. So, well, I think the heart, our heart's incredibly misunderstood in our society. It's typically treated like a blood pump, and there is that, right? There is our physical heart, but there's also our energetic heart, or what's often called the sacred heart or the spiritual heart. And to me, that heart is the source of emotion, but it's also the gateway to the true self. Like it's also it's kind of like the door that we can go into to receive information from higher sources of intelligence, including our divine essence. And so, and there's actually been studies that show this, that, and Heart Math was again who did these, that people can access information outside of space and time. They did this with like predictive studies where like they would get them into their hearts and then they would ask them to predict certain things. And they were able to do it with a much higher degree of accuracy than just random guessing. And so, it's like our heart is, it has that ability, particularly when it's open, to start to open to this additional information, that's available to us. And so what does getting in your heart mean? Well, really what you can do is direct your consciousness. I find you don't need to do this, but I find it helpful to kind of think about it in that part of your body, and you're using intention to just connect with it. And so that's all that's really required. Like this is a very important thing that can be applied to many, many different parts of consciousness, is that we have the ability through intention to just intend to connect with something, and then we can start to receive its information. And so we do that with our hearts, and we actually use the intention to open the hearts, right? And we do that through feeling. So feeling love, feeling openness, feeling gratitude. And at that point, there's more things that we can connect to when the heart is open. And so the way that I do it, and I do this a lot, like I have a practice every day where when I have questions about my life or things that whether I should do this or do that, like I do this process where I use my intention to connect to my heart. I start to feel a sense of love and joy. And I even imagine like me opening a door. And then when I open that door, I imagine, and through intention, which is kind of blended imagination and intention, that I'm connecting with my divine essence. And at that point, I can just start to ask questions and I receive information. And so, yeah, I don't think that it's required to necessarily receive information to like have your heart open. Like there's obviously times where you're just walking around and you get an intuitive ping and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? Right. But what I find is if you want to access information on demand and you want to connect with your true self, that going through the heart is the most reliable, effective way to do that. And that's just been my experience, and maybe other people will have a different experience, but that is what I have found in my own journey. And I would just share, you know, one of the things you can do is you can work on your changing your default state so that your heart is always open, right? And that's kind of like you talked about those levels of consciousness type of thing where it's like, you know, the love's at the highest, or the unconditional love, like that's what they're talking about. They're talking about somebody who has opened their heart effectively. And so that its default state is more or less like predominantly open and loving. And at that point, like it's very closely related to the degree of connection you have to your true self and that the information that it can provide you.
An easy practice I've read about doing is just like thinking of people and sending them love. Mm-hmm. And that if you can get to the point where there's somebody that you don't like and you can honestly send them love, like that's a way to practice kind of opening your heart. So I have to, like, there's very few people in the world that I could say I don't like, but there's a couple. They always tend to be kind of bullies. I don't know. I haven't been able to unpack why, because, you know, they say what you don't like about somebody is a reflection of yourself. So I don't understand why the people who get me are bullies. But whenever I see them, it's usually on social media, I'll try to intentionally sit down and like send them love. I just want to try to get to the point, because I will hope that by sending them love over time enough, that eventually when I see them being themselves, it won't trigger me anymore. But that's one easy practice, is just send people love as you think about them. And I try to send, going back to, you said, connecting to your heart, visualizing it coming from like the chest area. So when I'm thinking about sending love out, I'm not thinking it with my brain. Like I'm thinking about sending love, but I'm trying to like project it out of my chest if I can. I don't know if I'm doing anything right. This is just stuff I've read. I'm like, oh, I'll try that.
No, you definitely are. I mean, I think it's like the working with the heart is not an intellectual thing. It's a feeling thing. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. So like you like sending love. It's not like I'm sending love, right? It's like, right. I'm going to feel the love, and I'm going to imagine, again, I'm going to use that intention, which is an innate ability of our consciousness to move it towards that person. And generally, the way I like to think about the heart is like working out. You know, it's like we can strengthen our ability and change our default position of our heart through repeated exercise, right? That is what meditation is. It's like you're training your heart. And so, you know, each time you do that, it's becoming easier for you to access those feelings. It's also making that more and more your default. And so, you know, think about it like going to the heart gym with this stuff. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And I think that's a really, really awesome piece of advice around, you know, directing it towards people that you don't feel love to. Cause that's like, you know, putting some extra weight on the bar, if you will.
I'm sure there was a handful of guys listening or watching right now that just rolled their eyes. Like it's not natural for us guys, especially in the Western culture, to like think about love and talk about our heart and talk about feelings like that. So I'm sure a couple eyes rolls just happened right now. There's one more that I want to hit before we
Can I talk about that for a second?
Yeah. Oh, go for it. Yes.
Because here's the thing, you know, I think like, look, I was a college athlete. I was a football player. Like all that culture of like being soft and not tough and all that things. Like, you know, I lived that, right? And I thought that way for a long time. And what I would just share is like, you can still have all of that toughness, right? And that ability to protect and defend and stick up for what you believe in. You know, you can have that, and you can also be a deeply loving being at the same time. It's like, I think about like, it's like, okay, cool. I got a lion in a cage over here, and I'm not living as that lion, but I have it there when I need it. right? But I actually want to live as this like loving essence and being. And for me, it's like really a question of like, do you want to live into your potential? Because for me, a lot of these like things we're talking about, right, where we're able to receive intuition, we're being guided to our highest contribution, like we have access to information beyond space and time, like that is like a thing that all humans have an ability to have as a part of their life, and it's just a choice whether you want to evolve to expand into those capabilities. And you know, I personally do. Like, I personally think that, like, yeah, like I obviously want to have that stuff and those experiences because it's going to make my life better. And guess what? Every spiritual teaching is going to show you that, or a lot of them at least, not everyone, is going to show you that the heart plays an integral role in that. And so if you want that stuff, like you kind of have to like realize that you can embrace this part of this aspect of your being and incorporate the other things that have also been helpful to you.
I don't know if it's because this is like where I am today and this is the stuff I'm most interested in and I too want those things, but I do feel like there are more people moving this direction and wanting it's almost like there's like a universal rise right now. Is that just because this is where I'm living, or do you see that as well?
No, I see it. I mean, I think there's a couple of ways to explain this. First is like, yes, objectively, there does seem to be a lot more interest in this and more people opening up to this. And I think, you know, you can look at what is meditation 10 years ago, where it's today, where are psychedelics, like where are all these like altered state technologies relative to where they are today. And so the culture is definitely shifting. But I also think that, you know, another way to look at it is like the as within, so without, right? As you're going deeper on your path, as you're evolving, it's being something different is being reflected back to you, like from a totality perspective. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know this because I can only speak from my own experience, but there is a clear coherence between my own evolution and the evolution of what I see. And I think that aligns to my understanding of how this all works. And so I don't really know, like I can't say with certainty, right, that like, oh, I am creating what I see. But there is that coherence that is something that I can't help but pay attention to.
I'm so glad I asked that. I almost did. I'm glad I asked that. That was good. All right. So the one final theme I want to talk about, ambition shows up throughout the book, and you talk about clean fuel and dirty fuel. Can you kind of talk about what those are, and then how can we determine which one we're operating out of?
Yeah. So I think, you know, coming back to like the archetype of someone who is reading might have been like me, is like there are all these questions around, as an ambitious person, like whether this still jibes with being on a spiritual path, right? It's like all the books you're reading are like surrender, let go, like, you know, just allow everything to be great, right? And my teacher literally told me like, you know, your job is to accept reality as it is. And the more that you do that, the more you will understand who you are. And that was quite a confusing thing to stomach as someone that was like, I want to change the world. I want to, you know, build stuff and make things in my vision. And I think what I realized, and so I was quite confused whether that meant just throwing out ambition, right? And I remember reading the Surrender Experiment and being confused as hell because I love that book, but it was like the guy just says yes to everything, you know, and what am I supposed to do with that? And what I eventually learned was that, again, back to the content versus context thing, ambition in itself, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just about where it's coming from. And so this is the clean fuel versus dirty fuel concept. So the dirty fuel is usually coming from an unconscious sense of something like not enoughness, low self-esteem, insecurity, right? It's people that are operating in the outside in paradigm, thinking that by achieving XYZ goal, I'm going to feel good about myself. And they might not even know they're doing it, but they're doing it. And I did it. So it's nothing to feel bad about. Pretty much everybody does it, right? And, as you go on your journey and you start to heal a lot of this stuff, you'll begin to notice a shift, right? Where it's like, wait, I do want to do those things. Like, I do want to write a book, or like, I do want to have a podcast. I do want to help people with their financial situation, but I want to do it because I freaking love it and it makes me feel good. Right. And it's like, it's almost like that, like doing something as a means to an end versus like doing it because you can't not do it because you just love it or you feel inspired. And so, those pure sources of motive are what I would categorize as cleaner fuel. And the only way that I've found myself able to get in contact with them and continuously run on them is by cleaning up all the dirty sources, right? Like all the things behind that, right? And so you really got to you got to go in and you got to do transformation work, right? Because like I see this a lot where it's like people are like, oh, you know what? I made a lot of money. Now I'm going to make a lot of impact, right? And they want to have the biggest impact in the room. And like, it's still the same dirty fuel of like them needing to do things to feel good about themselves because they don't feel good about themselves in the totality of their consciousness. And so the only way that I've seen to kind of get in contact with that purer stuff is, for the most part, is to do the healing work, do the transformation work, do what we talked about with that triggering exercise we went into earlier, or parts work, or whatever it is. And then the pure fuel just starts to emerge. And this is where I think a lot of people start to realize like what it is they actually like doing. It's not a exercise in going out and figuring it out. It's an emergence that happens naturally as you start to clean up a lot of this stuff. And the beauty of the clean fuel is it's more sustainable, right? It's because you're doing something because you actually just genuinely like doing it. And that's a recipe for durability and creating something that lasts.
All right. So my final question before we kind of get to where we can all find you, how do we get the book, all that good stuff. So conscious accomplishment, if you imagine the future of accomplishment, if we get more people becoming more conscious and kind of getting rid of, the dirty dirt, operating off of clean dirt, all the stuff that goes in with that, what do you think it could look like as far as kind of culture and business and leadership if we kind of shift this paradigm to conscious accomplishment?
Well,
what's the vision?
This is a big ass question, dude, but a good one to finish on. I think there's like phases to this. So the first one this is how the phases have lined up in my own journey. And so the first one is like, all right, getting rid of this idea that it's at odds with our consciousness and spiritual evolution, right? And so like when that happens, everyone will start to treat the things that they're doing as a vessel for their evolution, right? So everyone's like, hey, we're at this job and we're going to do great work, but we're also going to use this job, right, to better understand ourselves and why we are the way we are and to evolve our consciousness. And so I think my vision is to have a lot of these practices and teachers and guides embedded into the places that we work and that we spend the most time, and to help people treat work as a developmental container. That's a big part of what I'm doing with my company, Conscious Talent. And then I think there's another phase after that. And that's kind of needs a recognition that consciousness is fundamental, which is what I believe. And so I believe that the outside world is a literal reflection of your inner world. And it's essentially organizing in such a way so that you can discover more of yourself. And with that idea, there is actually an enhanced agency, in my opinion, that the way to shift the outer world and the way to get things done is to evolve our inner world and use some of these innate tools that we have, like intention. And so as we move to that paradigm, there's an increasing shift away from like intense efforting and, grinding and making shit happen to realizing like I can actually step into my creative potential as a divine being and create things through intention, create things through imagination, create things through thought alone. And, it just starts to happen naturally as you go on to this journey. It starts to become something that you're like, whoa, I just like thought of this thing and it showed up. Or like, whoa, I put a strong intention out and then it just happened. And you start to realize that like you thought that like the doing was the thing that made the thing happen, but there's actually something else making the thing happen. And you have you have a lot more creative power than you were led to believe. And so that to me, I think is another kind of evolution that will happen, and many people are cued into this. And I think it's exciting. It's our birthright as humans, and it speaks to the potential that we all have. We just have to kind of embrace it and start to work towards it so we can realize it.
I believe all of that what you just described. Like I believe all of that. So it's exciting to hear that through my journey and through my experience and how I'm piecing things together, not quite 7 or 8 years into it as you are, that I think I'm heading in the right direction. That the people that I'm seeing, like yourself, have had similar experiences, have come to similar conclusions. Makes me feel good about the things I write every day and think about and put out there. Tell us real quick a little bit more about conscious talent. You mentioned that, but that was one of the things I wanted to end with as well, is just to give that some attention as also.
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that we identified is like when you start to get into this stuff, you just see the world differently. Like it's just a fundamental shift in how you relate to reality and how you put your energies and how you relate to other people. And I started to meet a lot of entrepreneurs who were like, hey, I want to find someone to help me with my business, but they kind of have to be into this stuff. They kind of have to see the world this way because it's kind of everything. And it just happened again and again. And eventually myself and my wife, who was running another recruiting business, decided to start a new company around this idea of helping entrepreneurs and executives find other leaders for their business that were both great at what they did, but they were also on some type of inner work journey. And it's our belief that the types of companies that you build, like what's possible and in terms of how you relate to each other and what you create, is incredibly impacted by the consciousness component. And so our hope is to start to make it easy to connect these people, to shepherd in the companies of the future and the ways of working of the future. And so that's what we're doing with Conscious Talent. And I would say if you have a company and you're looking to find leaders to join your team that are on this wavelength, like we can help with that. And then I would also say if you're a job seeker and you're looking to find aligned opportunities, right? What this podcast is all about. Like people just get this stuff and they're into it. And then and you don't have to hide this and have it your little secret that you don't tell anybody about, but like actually embrace, like we partner with those companies and we would love to learn about you. And so we have a place where people can join our talent network as well. So that's a little bit more about Conscious Talent, and you can check it out at conscioustalent.com.
All right. I'll link to that. It's funny you mentioned about like not having to hide that you're on this conscious journey. I can't tell you how many DMs I've gotten over the last couple of years from other financial advisors who will never publicly put anything out there, but like, I don't care. So I share the books that I'm reading and all the stuff that like most people aren't going to share. And in the DMs, there's a lot of people who are tiptoeing into it or maybe even further than I am, but they don't publicly share it. So I think it's kind of cool to be able to be in position to help people. Cause I think if they're able to like fully be their authentic self, which is what I'm all about, like that they can bring this knowledge they have to their work, I think it's just going to make them a better employee, which will make the business better. So I just think that it just continues to compound. So I love the idea.
Agree.
All right, so I'll link to that. I'll link to Evolution FM, your podcast as well. And then we didn't even get into your backstory. I only had a little bit of time with you, and I think there's enough podcasts out there where you've given that story before. So for anybody that wants to hear Scott's backstory, like that'll be in the show notes as well, episodes where he's given the whole story and, you know, being at Princeton and playing football and selling the business of Salesforce, all that stuff you can hear later on. But I wanted to dive in this stuff today, selfishly because I wanted the answers. So that will be in the show notes as well. Is there any final thoughts or anything else you want to leave anybody with before we let you get to your day?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the show. It was a true pleasure, and I just love talking about this stuff, and I appreciate what you're putting out in the world, brother. I really do. And I would just say, you know, at the end of the day, like a lot of people might not believe in this stuff that we talked about. Mm-hmm. And I would just encourage people to treat it like an experiment. You know, take an experimental mindset of like, what if I just try this for a week? Or what if I just try this idea on for size and just see what happens? Because ultimately, like, you are your own best, like, life itself is your own best teacher, and you need to come to these understandings through your own experience. And the only way that you can, you know, come to that learning is to try things and see what happens.
I think it's a great note to end on. I'm gonna make a promise that I want to, as I continue to evolve, and I can have a better conversation about the other beings that can be guiding us and some of the other things that you go into on your platform. Have you back, and we can nerd out on some of the stuff that, like, even a smaller amount of people will actually be interested in.
Let's do it.
It was a pleasure to have you. This has been a podcast that's been in the works for a while, and it happened when it was supposed to. So I appreciate your time. And then also, where can everybody find the book? Will it be on Amazon, all the places?
Books or should I send them? Amazon's probably the best place. Okay. So yeah, we'll make sure you get that link.
Sounds good. All right, Scott, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your work as well, and looking forward to continuing to follow you and chat with you as time goes on.
Thank you, my brother.